Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Caroline Culver, Chairman of Resources and Place Scrutiny Committee. Members of the committee present this evening are Councillors Anthony Amatharaj, Laura Coyle, Alan Macrow, Eric Pattenden, Chris Reed, Richard Sumner and Howard Wollaston. Also joining us this evening is Councillor Dominic Bowick, in attendance as Chairman of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee, and Councillor Martha Vickers, in attendance as Chairman of the Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Committee. Thank you for joining us this evening. Portfolio holders include Councillors Heather Codling and Ian Cottingham. Council officers present to advise and support the meeting are Joseph Holmes, Chief Executive, Sarah Clark, Executive Director for Resources, Claire Lawrence, Executive Director for Place, Shannon Coleman-Slaughter, Service Director for Finance, Property and Procurement. Stephen Chard is the clerk for the meeting and Vicky Phoenix is the Zoom host. Tonight's meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. If we hear the fire alarm, we must leave the building immediately via the emergency exits. The assembly point is the Dolphin car park. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we must await instructions from officers. We will adjourn the meeting until such time as it is safe to proceed. Finally, I would like to take the opportunity to remind members that we are subject to the Council's Code of Conduct, which requires us to uphold certain standards, including respect. We may not always agree with one another, but I would ask that in our disagreements, we are always respectful of others' views. Do members have any questions about how the meeting will be conducted this evening? No. Thank you very much. Do we have any apologies, please?
Yes, Chairman, we do. Apologies received from Councillors Jeremy Cotton and Ross McKinnon. Councillor Anna Macrow is substituting for Councillor Cotton.
Thank you. We have two sets of minutes this evening, one from our meeting on the 10th of November and one from our meeting on the 25th of November. Are there any comments on the 10th of November minutes, please, members? No. Would someone like to propose them? Councillor Pattenden, seconder. Councillor Reid, all those in favour? Thank you, that's passed. And the minutes for the 25th of November, any comments on those? No. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Sumner, seconder. Councillor Reid, all those in favour? Great, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Actions from previous meetings. So we have the list of actions as usual. Does anyone have any comments on any of these? Councillor Wollaston.
It's point 253, Chairman. Just wonder whether that business case has been completed yet and when it will be circulated.
Just open that up and have a look.
It's a solar farm.
Yeah. It says in there that there's due to be a business case and viability review, which will be concluded by the end of March. Are officers able to clarify if that's still the case? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other points? Okay. I noticed there's two actions with the number 269 against them. So we just need to check that.
Yeah, well spotted, Chairman.
Oh.
Very good.
Okay. Do I get a prize for that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Chestnut Walk, 266. It says on there that it's complete, but the inquirer, Brian Quinn, who submitted a written request for scrutiny, hasn't received a response yet. So I wonder if that could be followed up. Thank you very much. I've had two requests from members of the public to speak on items on the action log. We would need to suspend standing orders in able to facilitate this. Paula Saunderson would like to speak on actions 116 and 143. Are members content to suspend standing orders to allow her to speak for 2 minutes? Proposer, Councillor Sumner, seconder, Councillor Wollaston. All those in favour? Thank you very much. Ms Saunderson, if you'd like to find your way to a speaker, I'll give you 2 minutes.
What? Yeah, I don't expect responses. I've just got some new information as well. Action 116 from October 2023 relates to the Northbrook stream, which is heavily polluted and contaminated with PFAS forever chemicals from 6 reasons and sources. In September, this committee voted for actions to be taken by West Berkshire Council with an update to me by Christmas. So please can you advise whether mud testing and camera inspections have taken place, and if not, an explanation. Are roundtable meetings with the 3 risk management authorities being conducted? And if so, how often and when? That's West Berkshire Council, the Environment Agency and Thames Water. On the 3rd of February, DEFRA issued its new PFAS policy, Building a Safer Future Together. And Section 3, with indicative actions, addresses legacy pollutants, especially PMT substances, which are persistent, mobile, and toxic, with actions such as 3.15, which envisages Environment Agency and local councils working together to manage where legacy PFAS contamination may exist. Please can you do everything you can to use the combined weight and power of the 3 risk management authorities to mitigate this growing 30-year-old problem and find sources of funding that are out there to help you, such as the new National Housing Delivery Fund, which hopefully can be used to free up stuck brownfield lands in the vicinity which are part of this problem. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll leave this here for Stephen.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Ms Saunderson. So if we could make a record of that, Mr Chard, and make sure that Paula receives a response. I'm conscious that some of these actions have been on the log for a long time, so I think we do need to endeavour to try and get them dealt with and moved off. Thank you for that. The second request was from Mr Morgan to speak about the request that he made for scrutiny on delegated authority. We need to suspend standing orders to do this unless we're already covered because we've had a vote already. Yeah, okay, right. Mr Morgan, if you'd like to find your way to a speaker, and you have 2 minutes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's good. Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to clarify the scrutiny request that I put in at the last meeting. The reason I wanted clarification is the action resulting from that was a briefing paper coming, I think, originally from Claire Lawrence, and I think it's now under Sarah Clark. So I wanted to make the point, I think we need more than a briefing paper, and I'll try and explain why I think we need more than that. Is that okay with everyone? Good. As you're aware, this relates to 2.5 million delegated authority to officers, which I'd like to cover off. My reason for the request is that it's a relatively new change, i.e. this came into essence in July 2023, and I believe it's contrary to good practice, transparency, and results in not the best decision-making process. At the executive meeting in July 2023, EX 4407 provided a summary of 10 contracts valued at over £2.5 million. Since then, we've had at least 23 contracts going through on that basis. These are massive spending decisions which aren't no longer backed up by proper reports that members and the public can actually see and comment on. That's my issue. It wasn't always the case. Before July 2023, there were reports were submitted, and a couple of good examples like the Newbury Sports Hub and the redevelopment of Northcroft Lido. They were proper reports with proper detail in it.
30 seconds, Mr.
Okay.
Morgan.
So I'll keep it very brief. These reports no longer exist, and I think it's a mistake. The justification given was that there was a commission with these recommendations. We've asked for evidence of that, and there's no evidence of that. I think this is really very serious, and I think members, as well as the public, should be jumping up and down about the lack of transparency and reports that we no longer have. So that's all I want to say. So if you've got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Mr Morgan. There won't be an opportunity for questions at the moment, but can we just make sure that officers have the full written request that came from Mr Morgan originally?
Yeah.
And I think we're going to be having a look at that in March.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there is a draft paper already prepared, a briefing note, but I will make sure that your comments tonight are reflected in that paper for when it comes back to scrutiny.
Thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you. I will email my notes across because there's a couple of things in there that I haven't had time to get across.
Thank
there.
you very much.
Thank you for your time again.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sumner.
Yep, just to propose that standing orders are reintroduced, Chair.
Yeah, I second that. All those in favour? Great. Thank you very much indeed. We also have the slides from Shannon Coleman Slaughter that we were given at the special meeting last week, but we didn't have in the agenda packs. We didn't have a chance to look at them in detail. Does anyone have any comments on those? No, okay. Thank you very much indeed for that. It gave us the information that we needed about the asset sales and also income foregone by selling those assets. I did cross-reference the spreadsheet with the two documents we've looked at before, so the one we looked at last week and one we looked at in September. So we have a spend figure of 3.3 million. We have a savings figure of around 581,000, a cost avoidance of around 1.2 million. We were also told that around £7 million had been saved in agency costs by moving them across to PAYE. And when we asked a question about how that saving had been made, we were told that that had been done by transformation officers and not by HR. We also know that the 2 years, 2023 to 25, foregone income is 875,000. So we have all of that information now. We've been able to cross-reference it. So thank you very much to officers for that. And we also know from the meeting that we had in September that there were savings and cost avoidances around care homes and resource centres as well. I note that this evening's Q3 performance report talks about a 1.9 million saving for care homes. I think we still have a care home strategy to come. So it will be good in the fullness of time to see what's going to be done around that. I would urge that we have some clearer data in the future all in one place to save us from having to go over this several times. And just to remind members and the public, the reason we're looking at this is because of concerns from SIPFA and KPMG about transformation. So it's important that we as the committee that look at resources do scrutinise this in some detail. And also the performance report says that there's a 1.1 million variance for transformation. So as we face challenging financial times, we need to keep an eye on these various matters. So I propose that we have another look at this later on in the year when there's figures for 25, 26 that have been signed off that we can look at and see how progress is being made. Members happy with that? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Right, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? No. Any petitions? No last minute surprises. Okay, so item 6, moving swiftly on. Q3 financial performance report. I'd like to invite Councillor Ian Cottingham and Shannon Coleman Slaughter to present the report. This is going to executive on Thursday, along with all the other reports that we're looking at this evening. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting. I've got both friends and foe on the side of the chamber this evening. It's like having an interview panel. So thank you very much for having the opportunity to introduce this report. So the Q3 financial performance report covers both revenue and capital. Headline for revenue, £8.5 million adverse variance compared to original budget. And the capital expenditure, there is a certain amount of reprofiling regarding the capital programme from the original budget. So there is an underspend of 8.4 million. So if we quickly go through the actual report, so looking from a risk profile perspective, 151 officer talks over in relation to the overspend requiring EFS, which is in essence a borrowing facility of up to 20 million. It doesn't say that we're going to definitely draw down 20 million. It gives us the ability to draw down up to that amount. So we're working very, very hard to make sure that is as minimum as possible. You see on page 38 of the report, the waterfall between Q2, Q3 and outturn, and the projection to year end of 192 million. So you can see the increase from 183.4 to 192, which is the plus 8.5 million. Majority of that was in Q2. We do have an increase in Q3 of 1.7 million. So throughout the report, we have the analysis of where that 8.5 million has manifested itself from page 39. Adult social care up 4.1 million. We talked earlier about the care homes being up 1.9. That was in the original budget, and we haven't been able to dispose of the care homes in this current financial year, and there's a strong likelihood we will not be disposing of in next financial year as well. So that's embedded into the budget, which we'll cover off later on this evening. We also talked about resource centres. We had budgeted a saving, that's not happened. And for children social care, we have an increase in placement costs, especially residential care, going up significantly. Interestingly, just this week, I think there was a bit in the news about a government minister wanting to put on notice some of the profiteering which is happening in children's social care, making sure that third-party providers are delivering services which meet a fit for purpose, but also are not exploiting councils. So I think there's going to be a big drive by central government to reduce, hopefully, external costs which we're bearing on children's social care. Also, we've caught a little bit of a cold through our partnership with Reading over child care lawyers as well. So having to bear a cost there, which is a little bit more expensive than we were expecting. We have additional adverse variances in both ICT, transformation, finance and property, not to the same element as what we've experienced in increasing commissioning costs in adult social care and children's social care. We see later on the report that 1.7 variance, which is a subset of the main 8.5, explaining what the growth has been in the last quarter. And later on the report, obviously, we then have the analysis of how we're spending our capital expenditure and the reprofiling of that as well. So, as I say, the headline is, especially from a capital perspective, our weighted average cost of borrowing is 3.89%. The current Public Works loan board is 5.6%, but we have to meet our 30% criteria of making sure that no more than 30% of our borrowing is short term. We would like at this stage to make as much as we possibly can short term, rather than getting into long term borrowing at 5.6%, which is 20 to 25 years worth of borrowing. Like to draw everyone's attention to table 7.3, which after yesterday's news, which is great news, how the SEN DSG override, how government are proposing that they will pay off 90% of our DSG balance, which at the end of this financial year will be 30 million. So hopefully, based upon the devil's always in the detail, we will get a £27 million cash injection back. They haven't said what they're going to be doing after this financial year. But this level of borrowing liability benchmark is worst case scenario based on DSG, SEN, override, etc. So hopefully there's some good news within our long-term borrowing, which we've yet to crunch the numbers. My 151 officer is currently doing that. So very much hot off the press. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Any questions, members? I'll come to you in a minute, Councillor Boak, if I may. Anyone from Scrutiny? Yeah, Councillor Pattenden.
Thank you. Yeah, regarding the debt management and having the weighted average cost of borrowing at 3.89 and PWLB at 5.65, is that something that you would like to take more advantage of? You know, it sounds like a money for free sort of scheme in a way, but
well, yeah, at the moment, we're trying to minimise our long-term borrowing from Public Works Loan Board. That, in essence, it funds our day-to-day borrowing requirements. There are other sources of funding which we can have, but there are for particular types of projects, which a good example would be, say, the solar farm. We have been talking with there's a new bank, the National Wealth Fund, who lend for particular projects, but for day-to-day funding, especially VFS, has to be through Public Works Loan Board. So what we're trying to do is minimise that as much as possible until interest rates start to fall. But at the moment, obviously, interest rates at 3.75, but the Public Works Loan Board is at 5.5. That's more of a vote of no confidence in the Chancellor of Exchequer. Unfortunately, the fact that our government gilts, etc., have a bit of a premium, and there is a gap there which is probably at a record high between interest rates and, yeah, that's roughly nearly a 2% premium. 1%, is that okay?
Councillor Wollaston.
Yes, can I draw your attention to item 7.3 on page 44? The projections there show an increase in borrowing, as I understand it, from 241 million to 348 million in 4 years to 2028. Now that's just not sustainable, is it?
It's only sustainable if we can't afford to pay the interest and MRP. In local government terms, roughly around about 10% of your revenue gets to pay off the debt and MRP. You're quite right to say, and in the papers it does show regarding the MTFS, that's increasing significantly to 20-25%. It only becomes an issue if we can't borrow any more EFS from the government. So what's happening at the moment is that the projection with the MTFS, which we'll come to, is that we're increasing further and further and further over the next 4 years with a facility of drawing down 198 million, which will be in year 4 cumulatively, and then to service that's coming through to pay through the revenue account. And what you're having is compound growth on servicing your debt. But at the moment, the government are saying we're still going to be able to have EFS to fund that.
But have you put in place proper controls on any unnecessary spending?
We are, yes. That's all part of the FRP and also the Financial Improvement Group.
And specifically,
yeah. Yes.
All non-statutory spending?
Non-statutory spending, you could argue, is roughly 25%, 30% of what we do. That would mean
this is just unsustainable. So you've got to start finding a way of cutting the cost of running the council.
For this, from a political perspective, the fact that the funding which we're now receiving from government, there's an increasing demand on council taxpayers, going from roughly 65% to well over 80%. We talked last week. Unfortunately, you weren't here to be part of the debate over how the unfair funding review is placing an increasing demand on council taxpayers. And me as the portfolio for finance, I will not be the austerity agent of the government to cut non-statutory services. So I'm not someone who wants to be cutting libraries, sport, culture. That is one option which the CIFRA report has identified, but I will not be party to cutting back all non-statutory services. That is the policy of this administration. We are not wanting to be a local authority which just provides statutory services in adult social care and children and family services. That's a no. That's a red line for us. And I give that guarantee to residents of West Berkshire. We're not going to be a wasteland of culture, sport, library. That's not going to be the case.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask a supplementary to that? Am I correct in thinking that officers have been asked not to do any non-essential spending? Could you define what the difference is between the non-statutory obligation and the non-essential?
I'll hand over to my 151 officer who has this off to a T.
Thank you.
Essentially, our spend panel looks at expenditure that is not already under contract, because we have a lot of expenditure that's already under contract. To break those contracts would incur costs. And it looks at any non-contracted expenditure to make sure it is essential spend, essentially. So we have to provide that service. There is a sound rationale for the provision of that service. And there has to be a case put forward for us to approve that spend. We would expect in this environment, you would not see a huge amount of that spend coming through, because we have had spend panels in place for quite some time now. So we do have a culture of controlling the spend. So it's just, there has to be a business case for that spend.
Thank you for clarifying that. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. And I think another question, I think more broadly, you might want to pass this on. So looking at 4.3, we've got 4.1 million on the adult social care. This is kind of close to my ward, in the fact that my ward is actually the oldest in average age out of any of the wards in West Berkshire. People often come to the ward that I represent, and also many of the wards in West Berkshire, because it's the AMB. It's a great place to retire, which obviously is putting a pressure on us that, we're getting people who are going to be possibly into poor health quite soon or relatively soon. Have we done the necessary demographic risk assessment against what's happening with us on adult social care there?
So this is an exact question which I asked and challenged last week regarding the budget and MTFS over the modelling. So looking at the sensor data, looking at trends, looking at the fact that we have modelled an increase in volume in number of people accessing adult social care next year. So I think there's a 5 to 6% increase in volume. So all of that is being modelled to make sure that we are matching the age demographics of West Berkshire, and also the fact that we are having an ageing population. So people are healthier, living longer, but also potentially can have a higher level of demand when they get older into their 90s, etc., needing that extra help from us. So yes, that's all being built in. One statistic which did shock me 2 weeks ago, we had a presentation from regarding dementia, how the fact that there is a plan to build a specialist dementia care unit on West Berkshire Hospital, how there's going to be a 50% increase in the next 4 years in the diagnosis and demand for dementia. So early intervention is really, really, really key to make sure that, I know you can't stop it, but you can slow down the actual impact of dementia. So it is an area for us which we're looking at greatly. What can we do investing into preventative? It could be argued that's not statutory, but we are well aware of the fact that by investing in prevention and slowing down people needing dedicated, high expensive care, does have a cost benefit to us.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And it's good to hear that you're on top of that case.
Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As going back to this issue of EFS, I saw a report from the Local Government Chronicle today that said that 1/3 of all the councils they approached were either already receiving EFS or were planning to. And I think this, in conjunction with what's recently happened with the so-called fair funding review, basically saying that local government finance is broken. And the government is really going to have to do something to resolve the issue, because all these councils, just can't carry on like this. So, yeah, basically the government's got to do something. We can't expect that to carry on forever.
Yeah, and I think, as I say, one of the points which from last week is the unfairness of the business rate retention, of us finding ourselves down into 13p in the pound next year rather. And I was just mulling over, if I was a SME business deciding to live and work in West Berkshire, what incentive have I got paying my council tax, but also my business rates, knowing that 87p in the pound is going to support other areas of the country. I'm from the northeast myself, but if you look at the way in which that levelling up of certain local authorities are getting double their own business rates, which they're looking to retain. So there's not an easy solution, but I think there needs to be fairness. And if you look historically, how that country over side the Atlantic, they broke away because they felt, unfairness regarding taxation without representation. I'm not saying that we're going to be doing the same thing, but historically, where people don't, just look at the poll tax, how that caused a huge amount of unfairness.
I hope you're not proposing to tip tea into the wharf.
Thank you. Councillor Matharaj.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Cottingham. I would like to point out and draw your attention again back to that 4.3 and 4.4 section. The table alone reflects the pressure the council and the administration, we're all in to provide that best care. And it shows that, as you said, Councillor Cottingham, our care to those residents, vulnerable residents, is important. The table I'm pointing out is that it reflects the highlighted red ones, there is an increase in the net expenditure. Just wanted to draw your attention to the average cost. I know the average cost might have been always linked to the increase in the number of clients, but trying to ascertain if that average cost has been due to that the care providers profiting from that increase in the clients or the situation we are in, and is there a cap we can put in place to say that they cannot go above this profit because the average cost should relatively be stable unless something drastic changes from their side. So that's number one question, but I fully understand this is what we are doing for our residents, and it clearly shows that the table clearly shows how much of a stress and how we are able to support that. But my question is around that average cost linked to any profit sharing. That's
so you may or may not remember the huge uproar when national insurance was increased in the first Labour government, Labour budget, and new Labour government. What's happened is that has then cascaded its way through the external costs which we negotiate with the third-party providers. So they've uplifted their costs with the national insurance increase. We've also had consumable inflation being built in, so the contracts have been renegotiated, and the commissioning team have worked really hard to bottom down the pricing. However, it's still a commercial market. So what happens is that if we say we're not going to pay, we could have a resident having that care removed. So we then have to find somewhere else which has huge impact on someone in later life on their own. We talked earlier about dementia. moving someone out of one care home to another one isn't a very nice experience for that resident and family. So we've seen an increase in price inflation, contract inflation, renegotiation. We've also seen, interestingly, a reduction in people requesting care and the amount of money self-funding. So the model itself has seen a bit of a blip in the last 6 months of how much money we would expect people to contribute. That hasn't been as much as it previously was. That may just be a statistical anomaly, but it might be more of a wider trend that people are becoming more aware of the fact that how the model works with regard to being a self-funder and how much money they've got. Or it may be just a case that people don't have as much money as they used to regarding their own pensions and working longer and everything else. It might be just more of a condition with the general economic cost of living crisis which we face as a country.
I'm going to bring in Councillor Bowick now, who's been very patient.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, a question, if I may, for clarification. I heard on the Today programme this morning the announcement about the news item about the funding coming from the government. I didn't get the impression, it wasn't perhaps very well portrayed, that the government are proposing to fund historic debt that's built up. They were talking about debt since April until the white paper comes forward later in the year. I mean, is that a? I don't want to pour cold water on it, but it didn't fill me. At first, I thought that sounds great, but then I thought, hang on a minute, it's not that clear exactly what's going to come our way.
I think the devil is always in the detail. You always have a headline, and the articles I've sort of quickly read today saying that they would pay off the cumulative liability, but until, as you quite rightly say, Councillor Bowick, until we find out the devil's in the detail, we haven't made any firm decisions or into the papers because we don't know until they define. And also, what I've read says there's certain conditions which have to be met by having a programme to reduce the SEN liability. So it's not going to be free money. It's going to be very similar to the EFS of having almost like a CIFA report or a KPMG report to say, have you got adequate financial controls in place which prevent it snowballing? What are your long-term plans in this area? So yeah, I concur with you that yeah, there can be a nice headline, which a current Labour MP announced, but when you look at the detail, it's not quite as good as you expect it to be.
So I have a question then to the report,
Councillor Bowick, sorry, forgive me. Is this a new question? Because I saw Councillor Codling's hand. I think she wanted to say something on the last point. Shall I let her do that first? Yeah, Councillor Codling.
Thank you. I've got the copy of the statement in front of me, and it does actually say the plan is to resolve the SEN deficit for deficits accrued to the end of 25-26 worth over 5 billion across the country, but it does come with strings attached. It says we will be eligible for grant funding subject to submitting and securing the Department for Education's approval on a SEND reform programme. So it does sound like it is the accrued debt to the end of this year.
Because my understanding is the problem that we face at the moment is we don't know what's going to happen to anything that we accrue between now and 2028. Because I think the government's taking it over from 2028, and we're going to get 90% of the historic deficit paid off if we tick the boxes. But there's still that gap, isn't there, of 26 to 28 that we don't know what's going to happen.
That's right. I'm hoping that we'll get another announcement at some point. But I think the work we did around DBV that we got put into will help us tick all those boxes to get the grants.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Bowick, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks. Speaking to the report then, can you confirm that there no in-year financial pressures or mitigations have led to reduced capacity or delays to intervention or indeed raising of thresholds? Thinking about
Not that I'm aware of. I haven't had anything. Us as an executive, we haven't had anything to say that. No, I'm not aware. I don't know if.
I'm not aware of anything in the raising of thresholds like that. So no.
And then reducing capacity. I'm thinking particularly about the announcement that we've seen over the weekend regarding Kennet Valley Primary, where the SND unit has closed because of lack of funding, it appears.
Is that all right? I mean, it's actually a staffing issue. We're having problems, and this is we've got some brilliant units out there, but it's getting the right staff with the right experience to work in those areas. That's the problem we have there.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question on the care homes. So I know this was one of the original 6 transformation projects and we weren't able to find someone to take them on for us. It says that we didn't budget for the fact that we might still have them on our books. Could I just ask why we didn't budget for that? Why did we not say to ourselves, we'll budget for it, and then if we find an alternative proposer, that's a bonus?
I think, yeah, hindsight, yeah. I think we were in final negotiations at the time, and then it fell. So, you know, and on the risk probability, everything was in line for disposal, and it just didn't happen. Couldn't get it over the line. And looking at the market and the complex nature, especially something like No Trees, where it's out in Kentbury, getting staff out there, it's not easy. So, and also the legacy buildings do need a bit of work regarding having en suite, for example. It's something which we may need to revisit and be, how to put it, I wouldn't say creative, but looking at what, you know, the long-term cost of this. Is there another alternative which we can possibly get to?
Thank you for that. Any other questions, colleagues? Do we want to summarise any points to feedback to the executive? Anything in particular? I know it's only 2 days away, but Councillor Cottingham's here, so I'm sure he's listening. No, we've heard all of the questions that you've been asked anyway, Councillor Cottingham. Okay, good. That was very useful. Thank you very much for that. Item 7, medium-term financial strategy. Over to Councillor Cottingham again.
Thank you, Chair. So the MTFS is our, I suppose, long-term view of the financial pressures onto the revenue account with the information which we know when this report was generated. And as we've just discussed, it can soon become out of date with regard to it. So there is a lot of discussion in the report about the EFS requirement and the funding requirement to meet our obligations, both statutory and non-statutory, which we've discussed earlier. Excuse me, my phone's making noise. And as I would say, the fact that, as we discussed last week, the cut in funding, which is shown in 5.2 of the report, and it's quite stark to see the funding settlement, excluding council tax, how that is falling from 48.2 million this current financial year down to 33.1 million. So that by itself has to be found, and that's in today's money terms, in conjunction with the increase which we're seeing in day-to-day costs of inflation, but also in demand, which we talked about earlier with regarding adult social care, and hopefully children plateauing, but we're well aware of the fact that the more complex needs which we're seeing in residential care, which I think within the report, one of the reports we talk about one child costing us £28,000 a week, which is £1.5 million. That's the exception. However, this is always the known unknown to us, that we're always living on the, not say precipice, but with that risk that a child comes in costing us £1 million to £1.5 million. So we have to make allowances for that. So from I know it's quite an eye-watering table on 5.12. It shows the funding requirement from an EFS perspective. And if I bring everyone's attention to the prior years, that 24-25, we had 13 million, 25-26, 20 million. So we have a brought forward figure of 33 million. If you then add the projected EFS requests of a further 165 million by 29-30, with the information which we knew when the report was generated, we would be up to 198 million. With the SEN DSG override being paid back, and as we've talked earlier, that gap between 26-28, hopefully having a similar override. And I'm not sure we had the DSG 28 built into the MTFS because we don't know what it was going to be. That is worst case scenario. Hopefully that will not be the same level as what we're projecting, but as you made that comment earlier, we've forecasted on worst case scenario. So this is the worst case which we would see from an EFS perspective of the residents of West Berkshire. There's quite a lot of detail with regarding, I'm well aware there's lots of numbers in the report, but what we try to do is be as, I wouldn't say pessimistic, realistic is probably the right word to use of how we're projecting. Because we've seen trends with regarding inflation, demand, and also we're seeing an increase in council tax dependency as well. That seems to be the model which government are looking to push, built in within 4.99% increase in council tax. Again, we don't see it fair that we would be going to referendum to increase council tax by more than 4.99%. It is a very regressive tax.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Can I just ask a question about the referendum? I know some councils have asked and been given permission for an increase in council tax. Why are there two options there, that you either go to the government or you have a referendum? Because I'm guessing you're not going to get a referendum through to say we want to pay more tax. Mr. Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, there's 2 points in here. So one is a referendum to go above the limit that the government sets, which is generally 5%. One organisation has done that. I think it was Bedfordshire Police back in about 2012-13. And I think it was sort of 60-65% of people said no. And so what the government does now is, as part of some councils' exceptional financial support requests, they're putting through requests to go above the 5% and it not trigger a referendum. So the 7 that have been approved this year, I think, are Windsor and Maidenhead, 1, I think Trafford, Warrington, Shropshire, Worcestershire County Council, North Somerset, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. And their amounts are ranged between, I think, 6.75% and 9%. But generally, government only allow those authorities who have got historically lower levels of council tax through whatever decisions have been made in the past to then move their council tax levels up closer to the average. So there's 2 parts to the exceptional financial support requests. Some councils go just for the council tax rise, some people just go for the additional borrowing element in effect, and then some councils will go for both.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. Questions, members? Councillor Matharaj.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Cottingham. I have one doubt in that table in section 4.4, the section 151 table application. It's very clear in terms of telling us what's the application for EFS and what's the forecast balance. So that will be 15.8 from that 20 million from the forecast closing balance, which is negative. That's a bit clear. But what is I want to understand is the remaining two lines on the general fund support and then the risk reserves. So which one of these goes to the reserve? And then in terms of that understanding that table, that means that if that creation of the risk reserves to cushion the demand, it's 5.3 million. That means that that is the starting point for us to understand that 5.3 million is available to spend for any pressure, demand and pressure from for the next year. Yeah. So that's the question.
Right. So the 151 officer recommends that we have 5% of our expenditure as being our general reserve. So that's where you get the 10.5 as being the minimum. We're forecasting a closing reserve level of 15.8 for this current financial year, which means we have 5.3 headroom if we want it to utilise against future spend. But one of the things which we're looking to do is making sure that we have the governance over those reserves, that you apply as a department, as a section, to say, look, I want to make an application to have funding through the general reserve. So it just means a little bit more governance over spend and control.
Councillor Coyle.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question about paragraph 5.14. I may just not be understanding it correctly. It says it should be noted the above funding gap is after application of a 15 million annual savings target. So the financial years 27, 28, 28, 29, 29, 30. And then, of course, the budget, it goes on to say that this year's budget has proposed budget sets out 4.5 million of savings. I just wondered, so if I've understood that correctly, we're expecting to be able to make 3 times as many savings in the next budget years than this year, but maybe I'm just wondering if there's what the rationale for thinking we can do that is.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So thank you, Councillor. So yes, you are right. It's a much higher savings requirement, and it is important, I think, from my point of view, that we do put that higher savings level requirement in. I mean, there's been lots of talk about fair funding already this evening, but this is the reality of our situation. So the council has had much higher, or has met higher savings levels of around the £15 million mark previously in sort of a year, and has had some years above £10 million. We are going to have to continue to push a higher level of savings going through over the next 3 years. That is the reality, that as part of being in receipt of exceptional financial support, we are going to need to continue to generate higher and higher levels of savings going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I think there are a significant number of people, certainly in my ward, but I'm sure across the district, who are small business owners or even entrepreneurs, and I think they will be looking at the graph of figure 5, just above 511, the statement in 5.10, the capital financing requirement, which is the authority's underlying need to borrow, being primarily driven by exceptional finance support, and the fact that EFS is effectively an overdraft. And then we look at figure 6 and how that percentage figure grows from 48.5% to 100.6%. That's an exceptionally worrying, if I was a business, I would be really seriously worried about my operating costs there. I'm just wondering if anyone would like to pick up that and How on earth can a council continue on this?
I'll go first and I'll then hand over to Chief Exec. So I was picking up on the point which Councillor Williston brought up earlier regarding is this long-term sustainable? The truth is we've got the bank of the government underwriting us.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So thank you, Councillor. I know the comment there around the sort of figure 6 there, where it's showing EFS as a percentage of annual CFR movement. I don't get too like technical accounting here, but yeah, that is showing as a change in our capital financing requirement. Whereas, I mean, nowhere am I sort of diminishing the sort of scale of the exceptional financial support ask. But if you look at exceptional financial support as a percentage of the budget, that figure is still sort of pushing a much lower percentage budget. So I think even by the end of the MTFS request is set, assuming everything remains equal, £45 million. That's of a budget of around about £200 million. So the EFS ask is a very high percentage here of the capital financing requirement changes, but of our overall revenue budget, which is probably the measure that we need to look at perhaps most carefully, because we want to, you know, and through the MTFS, it does start to creep down slightly. That is the figure I think that we need to be really focused on, is actually how much of the budget requirement, what percentage are we asking from the central government to be EFS? And is that figure that over the MTFS, we need to make sure that that figure is starting to drop down as quickly as we possibly can.
I must say, if I was a small business owner, and I have been in the past, and run, you know, myself as a consultant, I would have said, you know, if I've got to provide that service, then and it's a statutory requirement, then I'll charge the person who's requiring that. So if the government wants to make me provide that service, quite rightfully, there are some very vulnerable people, but we should be cross-charging this back to the government rather than putting it on the local taxpayer to pay off the interest for something that they're requiring us to do.
Thank you. Councillor Amatharaj.
Thank you, Chairman. Not more of a question, but an observation. Figure 8, we can see the net retained business rates amount falling 13 million, and roughly 50% of the business rates we managed to get for 25-26. It's just pointing out this figures is really telling from that extraordinary council meeting we had. These are the figures we are looking at. If we would have retained all of the business rates from 25-26, we would have not needed that EFS at all, isn't it? Or at least 70% of that. But it also points out to that West Berkshire, just to want to clarify as well, Councillor Continue, it's not that it's fall in the business rates, it's we are doing really bad as a district attracting business. Our business are thriving, or we are having that business rates coming to us, but taken over by the central government. So that is an observation I want to make for the public or people who are watching, like how much of a fall in that business rates given to us. Yeah, it's really telling, worrying.
It's a very, very fair comment that we were retaining 60-70% of our business rates. We wouldn't be requiring EFS to the level which we were requesting it. You know, if we were able to keep 60 million, another 50 million, that's the whole in reality.
Thank you. Councillor Pattenden.
Thank you. In a slightly different area, this report talks about the Finance Improvement Group. And I know that, but we also have the Financial Review Panel. And I wonder if you might just, you know, describe how the two work together and what they, what their terms of references are.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much through you, Chair. So the Finance Improvement Group is the group that will oversee, apologies for 3- acronyms here, but the sort of Finance Improvement Plan, which came through to Executive at the end of December. And that group will have external representation from outside of the council. So We provide greater levels of accountability, greater levels of sort of review and external expertise to challenge us there as part of seeking to reduce our ask and our requirement for exceptional financial support as much as possible. The financial review panel, sort of spend panels, etc., are more internally focused within the organisation. We meet as officers every single week, to the chair's point earlier around looking at sort of day-to-day expenditure. We meet every week there reviewing that. And then we have a series of other sort of financial review panels which are looking on a service-by-service basis, you know, where the key pressures are, what opportunities are there to deliver in-year savings where we can to reduce the financial pressure on us.
Thank you very much for that. Any more questions, members? Okay. Are there any particular points you want to summarise to send back to executive, or are you content you've made your points? Yep. Okay. Councillor Cottingham.
I think there's one point just to pick up on, which I made a note of, is debt interest and MRPs being a percentage of total expenditure, total revenue. I think it's becoming an increasing line. And obviously concern which I've been hearing across the table regarding showing sort of almost like from a gearing perspective. So, you know, from corporate financing, you know, out there, they look at what their gearing, what their interest rate cover is. Again, what is our equivalent interest rate cover? Yeah. But it's something which could be brought into that report as well, just as giving a little bit more sort of clarification, because it is an increasing pressure which we're facing.
Okay, yeah, good. Thank you very much for that. Fantastic. Right, we shall move on. Item 8, Treasury Management, Investment and Borrowing Strategy. Over to you, Councillor Cottingham.
Right, so again, this is a bit of a dry report, which is, I suppose, from a statutory perspective of showing where we're borrowing our money and where we're investing it. So we've talked earlier tonight about the increasing loan requirements which we have regarding capital financing, how that's been projected to hit roughly 470 million by 28-29. Currently, this year end to be 345 million. We also talk within the report how we are borrowing money and how we're then investing this money as well. So there's, as I say, quite a lot of detailed technical tables within the report which give the reader a bit of an explanation. I think one thing to make a note of is section 615 regarding the Prudential Code, on how in 27-28 the CFR and liability benchmark crossovers. So the liability benchmark exceeds the CFR capital finance requirement in 27-28 in the current projection. So that's something which we need to, for more of a longer term, keep an eye on. Again, it doesn't take into account the change which we talked about earlier regarding SEN, DSG override. So hopefully once those numbers are being recrunched, we won't be in that position.
Thank you. Any questions, members? Okay, thank you very much for that. Item 9, Capital Strategy and Supporting Programme.
Thank you, Chair. Right, so in reality, the previous report talked about how much we need to borrow. This report shows you where we're going to be spending it, and the actual capital strategy financial years, the actual appendix gives an insight into how we're spending. And one thing I would like to bring people's attention to is the vision, which is in 4.1. We talked earlier about statutory and non-statutory, but 4.1 brings to life, our focus on social care, education, improvements to local infrastructure, road, flood prevention, etc. And this is where, from a capital spend perspective, the majority of our monies go to. So we can see on 6.1 the projection of how funds are being committed over the next 4 years, of which for next financial year 10.4 is going to be council funding, and that again is part of balancing the budget and the MTFS requirements over us borrowing that money at public works loan rates, along with the MRP of what is affordable. I've had quite a long discussion with the SY1 officer about our ambitious capital programme of what is truly affordable for next year. So a lot of discussion over that 10.4 million of being the balancing item, but you can see a breakdown in the capital programme and bring it live to residents. Some of the highlights of that, you know, Falkland Primary School, 2.8 million, education programme, 3 million, roads in there as well, active travel, 1.8, highway improvements, 7.2 million. So this is real stuff which residents see on a day-to-day basis. North Cross Leisure Centre, 2.8 million. And then thereafter, you've got the detailed programme of 26, 27 all the way through to 29, 30. And one of the things which struck me was how much we're going to gain to be investing in roads, 21.8 million. So there's quite a lot of detail, which I think we were asked for the last time we had scrutiny of this breakdown of over the various projects over the next 4 years. So hopefully we've addressed that requirement from scrutiny, and you can see that all reconciled on page 128 as well. And so you get an insight into the majority of that funding is coming from grants and contributions, 22 mil from SIL, S106, 8.9 and 49 million from our own borrowing, which goes into the capital finance requirement borrowing as well. So one of the things the 151 officer wanted to make sure it was affordable, which is one of the points which the CIFRA report picked up on, is our capital programme truly affordable.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you for that. And I think residents will be reassured that there's still ongoing investment. I think the one thing we have learned in the past is austerity doesn't work. Not investing in London's underground system was a significant impact to people who had to commute, and people have suffered for years of works, but now I think it's something that's generally working. And I think if we did a similar approach in West Berkshire and didn't invest in roads or schools or various other things, why on earth would young families want to come to West Berkshire? You know, why would you want to commute around West Berkshire for your job or your van or your business, various other things, if the roads weren't maintained and you're constantly having your suspension welded up or replacing burst tyres? So I think that's good. I think people need to understand the difference between that capital investment to maintain and also improve infrastructure and services that are going to be provided, as a difference between our ability to be able to pay for operational costs, or often termed revenue, or commercial areas might call OPEX. I don't know if it's anything else you'd like to make comments around that, Councillor Cottingham.
I think just ultimately our continued investment into the infrastructure of West Berkshire, as you quite rightly say, is that we want West Berkshire to be still, you know, a great place to work and live. And if you don't have West Berkshire looking as if people care, that will then manifest itself in other revenue pressures. So there is a well researched theory called the broken window syndrome, whereby if an area looks not looked after, you then get a huge rise in antisocial behaviour, and also you get the reverse of gentrification. You get people moving out to areas where they feel it is a nice place to live and work. And that is the risk is that if you cut and cut, you have austerity and the place starts to look untidy, unloved, unkept, and people move out. And there's been plenty of illustrations of that across the country where you have new towns had the initial investment and then didn't have the continuing funding, and people have just left those conurbations for areas which they believe to be better resourced and better funded and look better.
Councillor Matharaj.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just point out, no questions, but again, observations on the capital funding programme related to our ward, Newbury Speen ward. Decarbonisation project, the North Crop Leisure Centre, it's good. It's like we attended, both Martha and I attended that project meeting. It looks good. There is a commitment to deliver that project with a big benefit. And also, I just want to point out that the North Newbury School location, there is commitment to that funding. So that shows that even with uncertainty around that developers putting in application not to build a school, there's commitment of that funding, and we as I know Councillor Codling has supported that one throughout, and we as ward councillors and residents and parish are pushing through that for that school because it was a commitment. So I'm glad that that has been looked into and there is proper allocation of that funding for the next few years once the school is built. So yeah, hopefully that school will be built, and yeah, good to see those projects being funded. Thank you.
Councillor Coyle.
I suppose it's partly an observation, but I think it's important. We were talking about the public understanding capital and revenue, and how it's important to carry on with the capital spend, like you, for the reasons you set out, Councillor Cottingham. But I think the other important thing is the fact that the contribution from external grants, which are obviously only for those particular purposes for which the grants have been sought, and it looks like that's over half of the forecast spend, say, in this coming year. And I think just to say that I think that we have some really great officers doing really great work to get access to these important grants, and that they really deserve a lot of credit because they're so particularly important in the current financial environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I must admit, I wish the government would make it easier for us to get them, but I suppose it's the name of the game for it.
Do we feel that we've got enough staff capacity to apply for the grants that are available? Because I recognise that if you've got a day job, you don't necessarily have time to sit and fill in loads of grant forms.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think totally appreciate the question. I think the real difficulty is that if we just started appointing sort of separate grant officers and the government decided not to give out X number of grants, you know, we've got a real risk there that yeah, especially in our financial climate, that you know, can't justify that. The other issue we have as well is that, you know, you can see the trajectory of government funding and where it is focused, and it is those authorities who have higher levels of deprivation than West Berkshire. So our chance of success for quite a few grants is far more limited than other councils, just by virtue of the lower levels of deprivation here. So it is a balance. I suppose I would say I'm confident on those large grants, especially around highways, for example, that we have the capacity to make sure that we are putting in sufficient sort of quality bids, and we've been successful in the past, absolutely, around especially highways bids coming through. So I think when we need to bid for grants, we work closely together to try and get that capacity. Of course, the ideal would be that you would have someone absolutely dedicated and specifically focused there. But I think in the current financial climate, I think that's a very difficult one to put forward to members when it's so many other things that ideally we'd like to do.
Because I think there's a new Homes England grant that's available around social housing, and we discussed social housing before. Will we have any plans to look into that and apply for those funds, do you think?
I can't speak on the specifics, but government often do put out lots of different sort of funding elements. You know, we've got over £2 million worth of nutrient neutrality, funding just over a year ago. So, and the government have, through the funding review, tried to commit to reducing competitive bidding, but these things do keep coming up. And yeah, so yeah, it's difficult to say on the specifics of what will come up, and what our opportunity is for those.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I've waxed lyrical about the success, especially in the environment team of grant applications over many years. I think that the work that they've done has been absolutely outstanding, and the money that they've brought in to deliver projects has been exceptionally well delivered, well received. One of the issues that we do often find in conversation is that there can quite often be delays in that funding coming through from government. And I think therefore you've also got a requirement of commitment of resource to be permanently chasing up that funding, because one of the key things that I think that is an ever present, and certainly since COVID, though I hate to be the first one to bring it up, is delivery. Having the financial commitment is good to see, and I welcome it. I always will do. It's actually delivering on the projects that's the key thing, and that's not always in the gift of colleagues in the authority. I recognise that absolutely. I do wonder whether that's something to take forward for future years, as to looking at the massive amount of information that we have in front of us in this table, which is again always good to see, because it does give that credibility to the commitment that's being offered. But noting what of those things is an annual requirement, things like BBOUT, non-statutory, absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, essential for this region, for the amount of rurality that we have, and I always supported the application of funding on that basis. But I also see things like Newbury Railway Station coming up in repeated documents in repeated years, moving on of stages potentially. I do wonder whether it would be useful to see what is annual, what is carried forward projects or ongoing projects, because it's not always a case of carrying it forward. Sometimes it's a multi-phase project that's being delivered over a number of years. It would be, I think, helpful to see that in some sort of form. And I don't know, we are in danger of all needing to have a 3-foot screen in front of us to be able to see the information in one go. I'm going backwards and forwards like a lunatic at the moment from one side of the screen to the other. Maybe we could have screens for the budget meeting so that we've got something a little larger in front of us. But yeah, whether that's something that you could take on, Councillor, with officers, as to a slight change in the way it's delivered in future.
Yeah, you make a very interesting point, Councillor Solomon, regarding almost the lifetime investments which we've been making over a period of time. So, how much have we truly invested in the roads since year dot? How much have we invested in a particular school since year dot? Because these are all in isolation, and sometimes it's nice to see the lifetime of what we have invested in a particular project, sub-asset, etc. And we might find from there some interesting analysis that one particular school may be costing a lot more because of a legacy issue of how it was built in the 1970s or whatever, which then potentially gives us maybe a business case to think, right, can we rebuild it somewhere else, rather than keep on having to pump in more and more money. So I think you're quite right to say the information gives us the ability to make more informed decisions.
And I think there's an addition to that as well, which is something that I hear a lot of, being as far to the east as you can be, which is, what do we ever get that far? And I think Councillor Wollaston gets it from the other side of the region. So it may form a picture which helps with conversation and helps with commitment.
So to answer that question, I've already, part of the Aggresso Charter of Accounts, asked for a postcode of where that money's going to be spent or invested, so you can press the button to say, you know what your ward is, because wards do change. You know, we've seen the press again this morning, how land grab, but you'd be able to do a correlation against that particular postcode against the ward and being able to press the button to say, right, how much has RG whatever had, which is part of whichever ward, which then, as you say, what have the Romans ever done for us? Question.
Look forward to seeing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowick.
Thank you, Chairman. And I've got a similar kind of question, really. It's less about geography, more about delivery, about provision of services. So we're spending a lot of money on roads. I live close to the border with Hampshire, and I know if I could drive with my eyes closed, I'd know when I crossed the border into Hampshire, because the roads are much less comfortable. So we spend money well there. We spend money on provision of school places and services, but my concern, I guess my question is, are we spending enough on SEND and basic provision and so on and so forth, compared with how we spend on other capital investments?
How long is a piece of string? It's never going to be enough. I think that's the problem. It is a demand-led service. We do want to roll out as many places as we can to accommodate those children that absolutely need it. But we need to work with our schools to ensure that children are kept in their local school wherever possible and actually have inclusive schools. So I don't know is the answer.
Should we know?
We definitely try and model
Yeah.
what's coming up. Sorry, Chair, through you. We definitely try and model what's coming up and what the projections are, but we're hoping that it will, when we get through, what are those children who went through COVID, who are suffering most? And I think a lot of our high needs block comes from that COVID group of children. That should hopefully level out, but we try and model it.
Councillor Bowick, you ask a very interesting question, because obviously from a statutory perspective, you have the rules and regulations defined by government. So you have the compliance risk. You've got the financial efficiency of being able to provide the best quality service at the lowest unit cost. You've got what is best for the child, what is best for the adult. It may cost a little bit more. So from a commissioning perspective, hopefully we're driven what's best for the client rather than the cheapest cost, because the cheapest cost can be potentially not a very good experience for the client. I wouldn't want us to be going for the cheapest option all the time. You have this balance between compliance, experience and value for money. And it's something which we're always constantly trying to get that balance correct in the decisions which officers are making on a day-to-day basis from a commissioning perspective. And as I said earlier, we could close our care homes, move people out of the care homes to other care homes, but we know that would have a huge detriment to the life expectancy of those adults, and it's not something which we would be willing to do. So hopefully that sort of summarises for you that the challenge which we face of minimising costs, but making sure we're providing the care to the most vulnerable in society.
Mr. Holmes.
Yeah, just through you, Chair. I suppose the other thing as well is that we do have grant funding from central government for SEND places, for example. So the same for highways spend as well. So there is a calculation somewhere at central government as to this is the amount of need that that there is in West Berkshire. We can all have our own thoughts on that formula, but in essence, yeah, we do have some of that funding coming through.
Supplementary, yep.
Well, I'll just come back and thank you, Councillor Cottingham. My point wasn't so much about the delivery of services commissioning, rather it was a capital investment. Are we investing capital in the right places compared with everything else we have to do?
Yeah, and you quite rightly say within, if you look at the report, we've got a lot of investment in schools, so Brookfield, so we're making that a priority, that we're making sure that education is really key, because it is our future, and by investing in education, hopefully that then relieves pressure, as we talked earlier, regarding children in care, social care costs. So if you have, I do remember my own school childhood being in porta cabins and shared classrooms, and one might argue that brought me here. Did me any harm? I don't. Well, no, it's not the right. Yeah, share being in that sort of environment wasn't great.
Councillor Matharaj.
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanting to pitch in and come in and like Councillors Cottingham's and Councillor Codling's view says, I don't have the holistic view, but I can give one example from my ward, Councillor Boyk, in terms of that SEND provisions in the Castle School. Just a year ago, this project was to build 4 classrooms, additional classrooms. It was going to support between 12 and 20 children. But at that time, the waiting list was 82. So you can imagine, like, even after building that, we would have to have 4 times of that provision to cover that waiting list. So it's an enormous challenge, but you can see that in terms of that provisions, it kind of varies, and it's been spent, a huge spend, at least in my ward I can see, and Councillor Codling had the holistic view, but that's one example. There's been a huge spend on this end.
Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Another example is the castle at Theale, where the old primary school was converted at quite considerable cost, and £4 or £5 million, I think, to cater for children with mental and I'm trying to think of the word, needs, anxiety, and so on, and that's been a very successful project, which I walked past today, and the children were out in the playground enjoying themselves. So we are spending money in that area, and to good effect.
Councillor Bowick.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Macro and Amitharj. Yeah, I know how much we've spent on places like Castle and Castle in Theale. Much of that money was spent when we were running the administration, so I understand that perfectly, and I'm not making a party political point here. My point is it enough? Is it the right amount compared with what we invest elsewhere? I'll just leave it there.
A lot of, so we have to take direction from the officers who are the experts, so that they will be making requests and advising us accordingly. So I'm not aware that we made any request in the education capital budget at all. No. So yeah, this area is very much an officer-led budget from the education perspective, from a capital spend.
Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Chair. I meant to mention earlier on that it's good to see, again, for my part, the inclusion of SIL as a source of funding, and it reinforces for me the importance of SIL funding coming into the authority. A question for my clarity: I'm working on the basis that this is from SIL receipts which are then committed. Are we clearly we have some sizable developments that are still waiting actually to put a spade in the ground. Is there an element of forecasting that's going on with regards to that, or are you more inclined to keep your powder dry, for want of a better way of putting it?
Yeah, through you, Chair. There's an approximation that we get around, I think it's sort of £3 to £4 million worth of SIL receipts per year. That goes up and down. So the capital programme's on that basis. However, clearly with some big developments coming through, that will yield higher levels of SIL, which I think would probably actually be outside of this capital strategy period, because actually by the time some of those receipts might come in, we might be looking at future years. But that would undoubtedly help the capital programme. And of course, we have to apply that funding to the infrastructure delivery plan and what sits in there. And with that additional development will come the additional need for community infrastructure. But I suspect probably from some of those larger developments, actually we start to see some of the actual cash coming in right towards the end of this capital strategy and beyond it.
Yeah, thank you. And there's an overlay on that with, I think, what Councillor Cottingham was saying earlier on about where funding is being used, because of course there is a set of rules about what you can do with that money when it comes in and where you can use it and what you can use it for. So again, I think there's a good piece of information which would probably come out of the back of that. Thank you.
And sorry, Chair, what we'll do is look to spend the SIL 106 grants first before we then go to market to borrow. That's the, in essence,
relieved to hear that.
The free money in reality before we have to go to borrowing. But you're quite right to say there are certain rules and regulations which we have to abide by. We can't use it willy-nilly. There's certain criteria, especially for SIL.
Thank you.
There's a bit of a clue in the title, I suppose.
Thank you very much. I think it's welcome that the members' community bids funds are being retained, because part of me thinks that would be an easy thing to axe if one's in a difficult financial situation. But I'm sure I can speak for other members that that is a really essential fund that we can bid for, and results in very tangible projects in our wards. And sometimes it's quite frustrating as a ward councillor to find things that are tangible that you can point to that you've achieved. And it enables us to work in partnership with the parish council, something that's very welcome.
Just on that point, Chair, I know the leader has looked at this and looking to streamline the process with regarding the approval, the monitoring by officers as well, so reduce the amount of bureaucracy and timeline which we've all gone through to secure a member's bid. So he's going to make it a lot easier, a lot smarter, and also some of the criteria as well. So it means that that pot of money will be spread across us all in a far easier way.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry if I'm
Yeah,
right.
please.
I think that also offers a level of support to parishes, which becomes more stable from what I've heard so far about it.
So yeah, it was becoming a over excessive level of control, which you're paying an officer quite a substantial amount of money to be checking on £2,000 expenditure and everything else, and going backwards and forwards. So yeah, making sure the forms are a lot easier to complete. And as I say, Chair, the 100,000 we've identified, and it's important that, as I say, the members can be able to spend the money in a smarter, more agile way.
Thank you for that. With the playing pitch action plan and the 3G pitch that's planned for Faraday Road, I couldn't see the playing pitch in there. Is that under playing pitch action plan? I think it's £300,000 for the playing pitch action plan, and then more in subsequent years.
I can whisper to it.
So there is a provision in here for feasibility to assess the proposals moving forward. The Faraday Road 3G pitch was agreed in year. It's an adjustment to the in-year programme. You'll probably see it come through the outturn report and slip into next year's budget. So it's not a proposal in the budget itself.
Thank you very much. Did you want to say anything else about that? It's not, no. Okay, thank you. I think the alternative modes of funding for the solar farm was mentioned earlier. Was it the National Wealth Fund that you mentioned?
That is a potential area of funding. What we're endeavouring to do is revisit the business case. However, I want to make it very, very clear the primary reason for doing this is from a net neutrality perspective, so reducing our carbon footprint. We're all well aware we can't borrow for yield. Those rules change. So I want to, on the record, we're not, the programme itself is not there to generate yield for the council. However, but we're very conscious that with the lens of central government CIFRA report, there has to be a robust business case to pass. So we've been looking at how we fund the project, the sources of revenue, the capital cost. So we've gone back to the provider of how we can drill out extra capital costs through the how we launch, how we roll out the project, how we purchase the solar equipment, especially the solar panels. There's something called a corporate purchasing power agreement, where you go to market for 20, 25 years and secure that revenue stream as an example. So yes, there will be a very, very robust business case, which will have to pass this forum, has to pass CIFRA, well aware that it's a substantial amount of money which we will potentially borrowing, but we're also looking at other alternative ways to fund and also the lifetime of it. So indeed, we had a meeting last week or 2 weeks ago over this. So yeah, it's very much at the top of our list to make sure that it passes due scrutiny.
Thank you for that. And just one final question from me. It's about Chestnut Walk. So in the capital document, it says there's £1 million in section 106 for this. When this was included in the transformation paper last week, it mentioned 1.1 million capital SIL and homelessness grant. So I just wanted to check if that is definitely the case, that there are those three elements. Also, it said that there was, I mean, it's a derelict site. It says it was £30,000 to £50,000 per year saving on building running costs. So I was just wondering what building running costs there are for a derelict building. And my final point is, if the cost avoidance is £500,000 a year, which is great, how come we haven't advanced this project up to this point? Because it seems to me it would have been a great way to save a lot of money. And that building has been derelict for quite a while. I think it also talked about drainage needing to be sorted out as well. But yeah, if you can shed any light on the Chestnut Walk issue, that would be useful. Thank you.
I'll answer on the funding. This will be only the capital element of the funding because it's the capital programme. So any other funding streams incorporated into those projects will be in separate documents. In regard to the planning and delivery of the project, I can't comment on that. That wouldn't be appropriate this time, but I can say what you see here is purely the capital financing element of it.
So ongoing running costs, one of the quirks of business rates, no doubt we're probably paying ourselves business rates on this building being occupied and only being able to keep next year 13p in the pound. So the other 87p will be going out of the district. I would guess we probably also have to have security over a derelict building, insurance, all of those sort of running costs. And I don't know if children are getting into the building, but I would imagine there's probably been a bit of vandalism as well to secure it. Normally that's what happens with derelict buildings. I'm not saying the children are in Hungerford or causing vandalism, but I would imagine there are one of things that happen with buildings which are not occupied. You still have to have a certain amount of cost to to look after them.
Because we had a planning visit there a good few years ago when I was still on planning. It looked pretty secure, but I think it's been derelict a long time. Miss Lawrence, yeah.
Yeah, actually it's broken into this week. So we're just doing some site visits to see what damage was done. In terms of the timescales, it was part of the joint venture with Sovereign, so we've closed that down now. So that's why it's coming forward as an alternative provision led by the council.
Thank you. So just clarifying on the capital point, it says section 106 in there. Is it just section 106 or is there some SIL in there as well?
My understanding from the original business case, it is just the section 106.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Okay, any further comments? Councillor Vickers.
Thank you. Mine is just about an item in Appendix C, quite small in the scheme of things, but just a point of information. Social care management system replacement. It's Appendix C, the second item down. Procurement of a new social care case management system to replace care director. I just wondered if Paul could say a little bit about that, what that is.
Yeah, we spoke about that a fair bit at last week's meeting. Was there anything in particular you wanted to know, Martha? Well, it's an essential programme to, as it says, to replace care director. Care director has passed its best by some way. The programme's well advanced now. We're looking to go live, all things being equal, mid-April. And that will put our social care delivery in a much better, more sustainable place.
It's just to make it more efficient, sort of.
Well, so care director is not fit for purpose. Mosaic is the new system, and not only will it be up to the task, but also it will offer some new functionality as well that's going to put us in a better place. As
Mosaic, I've heard about that.
Yeah, okay, more than happy to talk about it. Martha, thanks.
Can I just quickly ask about another small item, shop mobility, the shop mobility scheme, which is great, Newbury Town Centre. Do we charge for that, or is it free to users? You know?
Personally, I don't have that detail to hand. We can look into it.
I mean, it's a great scheme, and people can test out mobility scooters and borrow them, etc. But I wasn't clear whether there was a charge.
No, it's a charge. I think they can borrow by paying a fee. I think.
Do they charge?
Yeah, I know.
You've used it, have you?
No, but just.
Okay. All right. So we're not sure, but you think you can.
I think one of my friends.
They don't charge.
I've just Googled, and it says that there is an annual membership fee. So there is something that is, but it says here that it's got low cost annual membership, affordable daily, weekly, or monthly hire.
Thank you. Any more comments on capital? Okay, let's move on then to the revenue budget. Over to Councillor Cottingham again.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Right, so on to the revenue budget, which will be discussed at great length, no doubt, on the 26th of February, which is part of the, obviously, statutory obligation to pass a budget which balances. I don't think I'm going to any sort of confidences that when my leader said in 30 odd years of local government, this is probably one of the hardest budgets he's ever had to pass, etc. So it has been it's been a very thorough process to get to a stage whereby we've incorporated some of the variances which we've discussed earlier this evening, for example, the care homes. We talked about the resource centres. We've talked about the increased pressures in unit costs for adult social care and children's services. Also modelling increases in actual commissioning regarding the volumes of demand-led services, but also protecting the non-statutory elements. It's something which we have taken a political decision on to maintain non-statutory services within West Berkshire, and it does come at a cost to us through having to fund through EFS. And we haven't taken the decision lightly. You see on page 4.4, it's a new report where we both show the expenditure and income of where the variances are, where the growth has been, of increasing from 192 to 210.9, so that's just under 19 million. year on year from a Q3 outturn to the net budget. And yes, it hasn't been an easy process, but we do feel we have an obligation to the residents of West Berkshire to maintain the services which they receive and cherish. It would have been quite easy for us to cut the establishment and non-statutory services without the need for EFS, but as I said earlier, we don't want West Berkshire just to be a council which provides social care. There's more to it in providing those services, and hope libraries, culture, sport, etc., waste management, investing in West Berkshire being a great place to live and work. So it's interesting also if you look at the appendices, especially I know it's a very small sample, I think around roughly 140 folk, which we asked the question, how would you manage our funds? And number one of that list was roads, highways. So, which is an interesting, as we've been discussing earlier this evening, the number one thing came back, and I think it was then education and children. So I know it's a very small sample, but we seem to be reflecting what our residents want us to spend the money on.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not usually a numbers guy. I leave that to my colleagues here on the right, and missing a certain one who's really good at numbers. I'm sure he'll be here on the full budget council as normal. But on the table under 4.3, the funding statement for financial year 26-27, let's have a line that says collection fund deficit on council tax latest modelling forecast deficit. So 25-26, we've got minus 0.99 millions, and 26-27, we've got minus 2.81 millions. I'm just wondering why we've ended up with those figures, those columns.
Sorry, I'll give the first bit. I'll hand over to 151. So it's a simple matter of our collection of council tax is falling because of bad debt, the fact that you've got the cost of living crisis. So our collection is unfortunately falling. That's the way we are in the economic cycle.
Yes, essentially. So those figures come out of our statutory returns. So those are figures where we submit annually our anticipated collections versus what we actually close out the accounting year with, what we've actually achieved. And that creates a deficit position between periods that we then have to account for in the MTFS. So those are driven by our statutory returns. But as Councillor Cottingham said, it is largely driven by our collection rates as well. And you will have noticed in the MTFS, we have adjusted our collection rate to try and minimise deficits moving forward.
I was just thinking that it doesn't show, considering the incredible large powers that the council has on recovering council tax from residents. It doesn't sound very encouraging on the economy, but I can see Councillor Cottingham's finger go up. Maybe I've got the wrong end of the stick there.
No, you haven't, but you also have to take into account we can be very aggressive in the way in which we collect the debt. I far rather us be a bit more human over looking at individual cases and coming to an arrangement where people are in need of care rather than sending in the bailiffs straight away. That's a very, very aggressive dunning collection process, which I would not want us to have that reputation of jumping on our residents when they're in need of financial support. Obviously, every case takes its merits, and we have to look at their finances. And again, we have to get the balance over potentially residents pushing the envelope too far. So it's what's fair for other council taxpayers, but also you don't want to make people homeless by foreclosing on a debt, which then causes the pressure on homelessness in another part of the budget. So it's getting that balance between what is fair and on the individual, but also other council taxpayers. And yes, I think it's again part of the cost of living crisis that we're seeing a decrease in that, an increase in our bad debt in reality.
Thank you for that explanation.
Councillor Matharaj.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, a number of other figures from the council perspective we looked at. I just normally, this report, every year I look at the parishes because we are part of the parish, Speen Parish and Shoreham Donington, which we are part of. So one of the few parishes, just to point out the figure, Shoreham Donington has an increase of 2 pence per household and Speen has £1.36. So they are providing much, or we are providing from parishes much more value. The question to Council Continuum is like with the devolution or with this whole new council strategy, there's a lot of concerns and uncertainties among the parishes that some of the services are going to be devolved as part of that one, like they're going to take more services. You can see like all of the parishes are doing their best to keep their rates, although it's not that, you can't compare parish budget to the presets to the whole. So it's not a like for like, it's like totally, I accept that. But you can see like the parishes are the ones which work very low on the ground, maintaining parks and all those ones. So just wanted to get some assurance that as part of this one, so they are going to get that value for their presets they put in, and then not, they're going to be not in stress for the next year when this devolution and all these things coming up.
I'm not aware that there is any, say, pressure to cut parish funding.
Not financially, sorry, Councillor Cottingham. What I meant by was uncertainty or the pressures, maybe more devolution in terms of services being taken, like passed on to them. It's like.
Well, I think we've had a separate working party looking at that regarding the, and it needs to, my understanding, there needs to be a pull rather than a push. We're not going to push things onto the parishes without the funding. There has to be a pull. So I'm also double-hatted regarding Thatcham Town Council, and we know we can do certain things cheaper than West Berkshire councils. Good illustration is dog bins and litter bins that we have. The eyes and ears of officers in Thatcham, I always felt it was a little bit. Our reference colleague of Claire, John Winstanley, as having to address dog bin collections and waste bin. It just feels overkill that someone at that level is dealing with a solar farm up here. And next minute he's getting an email about a dog bin not being emptied in Thatcham. It's ridiculous. So I think it does make sense from a localism perspective, where there is the ability to push down into officers at a local level who know the local area better, where we do devolve those services and get probably a better value for money as well, for that services which are provisioned. Rather than a big contract for all of the bins in West Berkshire, you're able to then segment down to the bins in Thatcham, for example. You get a cheaper rate.
I think we've raised this point before about the opportunities that local government reorganisation presents when it comes to working with parish councils on the services that are provided. I think it would be good if we can work proactively with them, as you say, with a view to them pulling things away from us rather than us pushing things onto them. But I think we should try to take advantage of that process. Because I know, particularly if we were to merge with South and Vale, they've got a district council which they feel is close to them. And if that becomes part of a unitary, they feel like they're not having devolution, they're actually having the power and the decisions taken further away from them. So that's where I think the parish councils must be, we must work with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because if you devolve further down, and make those units smaller, by its very definition, you're going to get greater awareness of what's happening in that locality, rather than, and I suppose that's all part of the government's model of having councils, rather than having command and control from the centre.
It's interesting. Sorry, Councillor Boak, I'll come to you first.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Cottingham. So it's a big challenge. What modelling has been done to show that savings taken elsewhere in the budget will not increase children's referrals or exclusions or care costs in general relating to children and young people? What linkage is there between that?
So, as I say, where we can, we have protected external costs for children. You can see there's quite a substantial investment in that. So, you know, in the budget itself, there is a £4.4 million increase in children's services. And as I say, we've been working with the finance team, we've been working with the ED for service director for children to making sure that the volume of demand is realistic, and also the unit cost is realistic as well. So we've done quite a lot of analysis, and each, I think, of the line items which we have, I've got another report somewhere, is just about every line item there is increase in the actual modelled cost of providing those services. The only one which has gone down slightly is residential disability, where I think we're looking to have improved procurement on that provision. So it's something which, as I say, we've been drilling down to make sure that we are investing into providing that care and investing in, as I say, those services. I don't know if you've anything else you want to add.
Part of our transformation funding, we actually invested in a new commissioning team, which is now getting quite well embedded. And that's actually giving us the ability to commission places ahead of actual need, rather than having a child come in and social workers then scrabbling around to find a place. We've got relationships we're building with providers through that commissioning team. That is having a push down on the costs.
Mr. Holmes?
Yeah, just through you, Chair, just to say as well, the government have put in place a new sort of prevention grant for children. There's some of that, as with quite a few of the specific government grants which are coming through, an amalgamation of previous grants which existed, pulled together. But it is one area where there is a small increase in funding to try and help with additional preventative activity, which has to be key to part of our financial sustainability into the future.
Do you have any more points?
Yeah, yes. Thank you, all three of you, for responding. And I'm absolutely certain that you're doing a great job at drilling down and managing the costs, and investing. But my point was a slightly different point. It's kind of like the law of unintended consequences. Hypothetically, I know this is not a plan, but if you close the playground somewhere, you might impact health and well-being of children. So what modelling have you done to focus on the link between savings elsewhere and the services that we deliver to our children and young people?
So through you, Chair. So we have been looking at that, and looking at things, for example, in health and all policies, for example, and seeing how work through public health team can support colleagues, especially in children's services. You see the Director of Public Health's annual report this year. There's a really strong focus on Best Start and the first sort of 1,000 days of someone's life. So we have looked at those savings to try to ensure that there's not a detrimental impact of making a saving here on children's services or indeed any other part of the council. And I think it comes a bit back to Councillor Coyle's point at the start of this debate around it's a slightly lower savings target for next year, much higher into future years. And some of that has been a reflection of making sure that we don't make savings which end up costing us more into the future. That that is a really negative place for us to get into, and one we have sought to avoid for this budget.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I just noticed on we're missing a few precepts on fire and rescue precepts, which I'm hoping will be there soon. A few parish councils have been a little bit late. Unfortunately, I noticed there was 2 from my ward. The chairs are doing some work on Thursday, I believe, on one on that particular area. I did break my habit and talk about some figures, but I'm sure from a groan from my fellow councillors, I'll go to my normal area of safety, which is risk. Taking that councils as a whole are going through a whole load of structural deficits with over a decade of real-term funding reductions and rising demand pressures. We've got the SEND and adult social care, which is seeming to crowd out discretionary spends services. Potentially, there are areas of business rate income volatility, depending on how the economy is going to go for the future. The rising staff costs, including the national insurance increase that we've had fairly recently, contract inflation, care markets, waste services, energy and construction inflation, impacting property and capital accounting, and the fact that councils have to, we've talked about grants, but they're not guaranteed, and often they're very small pots with inconsistent criteria, I think would be fair to say, although Mr. Holmes may disagree with my view on that. Are we running a risk that costs may exceed some of our assumptions, or are you fairly comfortable with this balanced budget that you've taken a lot of potential risk, not only locally but also the macroeconomics that surround us, and what can't you take into account, I think, as well?
So, as you quite rightly say, any budget, any forecast is what you know today. We have baked into the budget a 3.5% salary increase. We've also baked in a 4.5% increase, 4.8% increase in adult social care in children's in there. So we've made provision within the budget to give us headroom. Obviously, that's all contextualized with regarding the negotiations which we do with our providers over the annual procurement process. We have said earlier, baked in the fact that the care homes will still be with us. We've also kept the resource centres. So we have been, it's a very prudent budget. However, there's always going to be a potential surprise. And I suppose one of the biggest risks, as we've talked earlier, is residential care homes for children. If we get a child coming in costing us 30k a week, there's 1.5 million. But one of the things which we're doing is looking at those care packages weekly basis to make sure the child is on the right package. Because in some ways you could argue that is probably failure, isn't it, by the system if we're having to bring children into care. It's it's the last resort, and we don't want that to happen. It's not fair on the child. And ultimately, you could argue, is it, ultimately fair on 163,000 residents of West Berkshire having to incur a cost of £1.5 million on one individual? But that's part of what we do, is to protect the most vulnerable in society. So, yeah, it's what we know, and it's, the advice we've been given, 151 officer, going through all of the various iterations, all of the challenges. Yes, it's a very prudent, realistic budget which we've put in place.
Thank you very much. I think those words are relatively reassuring. I hear the words that we're maintaining services, but it's a prudent budget, which I think is what residents really want to hear. It's realistic, considering the macroeconomics that are surrounding this at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coyle.
Sorry, it's just a small question about the fees and charges, because there are schedules of fees and charges which are the ones that West Berks is charging, and the increases, some of which I appreciate are statutory, so they're outside of our control, and others are the discretionary ones. And then there's a schedule that relates to the public protection partnership, and I think the ones relating to the public protection partnership that are discretionary seem to all be at over 7%, whereas our discretionary hours, as in just West Berkshire, are 4.8%. Is there a different rationale for those? I'm not saying that we should increase them more. I just wonder why the difference.
So my understanding is the PPP is those are more of a centralised. We don't have too much governance of how they're set by West Berkshire's perspective. They're imposed. And we've taken a decision at West Berkshire to increase our fees by that 4.85% amount. We have to be careful because we don't want there to be easy targets. The motorist in the past has this feeling of, let's just whack up car parking charges. Well, they're very easy to do that, and it can have unintended consequences of people saying, you know what, I'm not going to come into Newbury, into Thatcham, or wherever the car parking charges are. I'm going to go somewhere else. So you can drive away commercial activity, again, which has a negative impact on the revenue. So in fact, by charging more, you get less. So it's always a balance. And as I say, we've gone through this. These are the proposals, and I think there's going to be, as I said, for a report identified, there's more work which needs to be done in this area to make sure that we are maximising our revenue opportunities which we have within West Berkshire. And making sure that we are, as I say, that demand curve, not pricing ourselves out of the market as well. They have to be fair and reasonable.
Yeah, and thank you for your chairs. Also, just respect the PPP as well. You can see we've got the average hourly rate there as well, and that's also what drives some of that differential percentage change, because you have different drivers within different parts of the council services. So even though lots of the council services go up by 4.8%, you can still see some differences as well, because we've used roundings in there, which will drive a different percentage too. But also, same in the PPP, we're looking at the hourly rate as well, which we can charge through, and then that's agreed both through West Berkshire and Bracknell, and then Wokingham and Part as well through the partnership.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again with fees and charges, this time around the planning side of things, good to see that there is some support, and I think that's central support for increasing some of the planning fees. The one thing that I do think is missing from that is charging for upheld enforcement claims. I think supporting and managing to consistently resource the enforcement team has been an ongoing battle for many years now. And I don't know whether that's something that we are prevented from doing by central government, or whether it's just something that we haven't looked at as an opportunity or wants to take on as an opportunity. Should we charge for upheld complaints that are put in for enforcement officers.
We have a piece of work underway at the moment looking at all of the fees and charges and other opportunities. So we are getting a resource to look at all of that. And I think you're quite right to say there's probably stuff which we could be doing and we're not doing at the moment. So it's getting that refresh of the entire portfolio, the product listing. So if you add these 2 pages together, you've got over 100 pages of fees and charges, but it's been a bit of a course left for myself at the moment. You know, there's 800 services which we could potentially charge. And again, are we doing the full cost recovery is a good illustration. It's having that more detailed insight into we provide X, costs us X, but we're only billing X minus that. And so we're actually making a loss where we should be recovering our overhead. So again, it's all then part of making sure that we have a commercial strategy which reflects the true cost of delivering those services where we're able to do so. And there's quite a wide variety, if you look across councils, of how they charge for the same service. I know, Mr. Holmes, you did a piece of work quite a while ago, a couple of years ago again, where we could see opportunities, gaps in the gaps where we were charging under under what other councils were doing. But we're not advocating we're going to double prices overnight. Well, that's yeah.
No, but I think certainly as far as enforcement is concerned, it's an area which, you know, I found in my own area there are repeat offenders. For example, the same developer committing the same acts in 2 separate developments, and actually, I think they should be charged for it. I think there should be a penalty for it, and I think they should probably go into the application process knowing that there's going to be a penalty for it. It might actually put them off of flexing the rules, shall we say?
Mrs. Lawrence, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. That would be great. Unfortunately, the system doesn't enable us to do that. At the moment, the planning fees are set nationally by central government. Through the new planning legislation, local councils will be able to set their own fees and charges, which are reflective of true costs. However, it's not reflective of all the costs of the planning service, because things like enforcement, things like the local plan process can't be covered through the planning application fees. But it will give us the ability to include things like consultation from the Drainage Authority or the environmental team, for example, that will be able to be incorporated. We're waiting for government guidance on the criteria that we would need to apply, but unfortunately that doesn't relate to enforcement. The reality is that the only way we can secure any funding from enforcement is through fines after enforcement notice has been issued, and if it's not complied with. There are certain fines as well for things like stop notices when they're not adhered to. But I will be honest, they're quite low. And if there's something going on which is very profitable, then often the people undertaking that activity will incur the fine of a couple of £100 and continue to make profit on what they're doing unlawfully. So it's very unfortunate, but I'm afraid that's not possible under the system at the moment.
I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? Is that people will take that calculated risk of, I've got this far down the line, actually I can afford to do it now. I recall the same sort of thing happened with the big Tesco's that was developed in Reading, where they knew there was a load of tree protection orders out and they actually cut them down and went, well, do you know what, we'll probably make that back in the first week. And they did. There is on page 159 an advice not covered in the above section. Well, I say if they're prepared to have something as a title that is expansive as that, then maybe it should be used to our benefit rather than anybody else's.
Picking up the point Councillor Solomon made and also Mrs. Lawrence made was cost of doing business. That's what they do. They'll do the business case. And as you quite rightly say, they get that money back in a week, not even, or even a day, which is, yeah. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. Other people are making those decisions. You may argue it's not ethical. Yeah, but yeah.
I think we should capture the point that Councillor Sumner has made, though, about that extra catch-all and whether there's anything else we can do around that. Yeah.
Apparently, the other thing we can do is proceeds of Crime Act, so we can secure funding when there has been something which is essentially a crime under the legislation. And I think that we have been successful for TPO breaches in the past.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Yes, it's on the similar sort of theme. When I look at the planning fees on there, and it's set by government, and the fact that on whole averages councils are now getting what 8 to 14% across the country, England, lower percentage-wise, sorry, 8 to 14% lower than in 2010 in real terms in spending, and the fact that actually most councils it's about half of their income is coming from council tax, the rest 32% from grants. I see 22% from business rates. That would be nice for us and ongoing. Now we're down to 13%. I think generally people ask me that, why aren't we building more houses? Surely that'll bring the council tax up, and therefore you'll be better off. But actually, what I'm seeing from the figures is actually population growth will outstrip our council tax income. We'll have more adult social care, especially if we're in A and B. It tends to be more of a target for people who are retiring rather than working families. But again, more children generates more costs, more waste, highways, environmental services. And so actually, if we build more houses, then demand is going to outgrow our tax that's coming in. It sounds a bit of a broken model there.
Through you, Chair, I'd say, I think my view would be certainly in the sort of short to medium term that growth in the council tax base through additional properties would be financially beneficial to the council. I totally take your point that the higher the population, the higher the amount of demand you have, you say through waste, etc. But generally, when I look at those councils, some not too far away from that have experienced significant housing growth, that their ability to cope with financial pressure has been greater than ours because of that strong tax base. And I think I'm right, to the 151 officer, I think by the end of 28-29, I think 84% of our income will be coming from council tax. So we are just so highly geared towards council tax as a council compared to most other councils, that growth there is a pathway to greater financial income for us in a far greater way than most other councils up and down the country.
And in the long run, I suspect Scrutiny should look at some of that modelling in a bit more detail. If I may just go on to back to the planning fees, which I can see is set by the government. I come from an agricultural background, so my father always used to say, as I believe Mr. Holmes did as well, does it actually wipe its nose when he's talking about buying cattle into fatten up, and is he going to make a profit on this? Taking then that a lot of our planning, and especially in my ward, isn't new houses. In fact, I don't think a new house has been built or a significant material number for a long time. I know there will be a significant number down the bottom of the hill, which means no sill, little or no increase in the council tax. But I do see that some of these applications are incredibly complex. Even one comes to mind, which is over 100 documents has now been put on the repository with multiple exchanges. I'm just wondering, does planning wipe its own nose?
Would you like to answer this, or Mrs. Lawrence?
Oh, Ms. Lawrence is
Yeah.
going to, but I mean, my answer would be no, but there's some changes coming in.
Not through you, Chair, not at the moment, no. It's woefully under what it costs to deliver the service. So interestingly, the major applications just about cover up their fees, cover the cost. It's the minor applications, the household applications, that they only cover approximately a half to 2/3 of the cost of the actual processing of that planning application. But as I mentioned, under the new legislation, we're able to set our own costs, and hopefully we'll model it so that we do cover the costs. However, there were other services within the planning system, like the planning policy, like enforcement, that we can't charge for, and they can't be incorporated within the costs that we charge on planning application fees.
That is good to know. If someone's getting £100,000 extension, I'm sure they can afford proper planning services, especially the very talented planning officers' time that we have. They should be expected to burden all of that cost. Thank you.
I think when it comes to raising funds, it's something we probably should look at more in the future. I'm conscious we haven't got any task and finish groups coming up after Councillor Rees is done. Not that I want to create more work for the officers, but if there are areas where we think we could be raising money, and we could do, we can have that discussion through the scrutiny process, maybe have a task and finish group where we bring some people in and have a discussion about it in part two. Do use the scrutiny mechanism for testing those ideas out, because I know people go to conferences and they hear what other councils are doing and they think, oh, maybe we could do that. So maybe have a think about how we can scrutinise and use our mechanisms to explore some of those ideas, and let's try and be creative. But I think it's positive about the fact that the law is going to change around planning, because those services really do need to be able to cover their costs, absolutely. On the consultation that Councillor Cottingham mentioned, as you say, it's quite interesting that roads and transport is top. I'm sure I can speak for other councillors that when we go to parish council meetings and we hear from residents, a lot of complaints are about potholes, for example. They are about place-related things, whereas it's people-related services that are actually taking up a lot of our costs. I think we probably as a council need to do more to explain to people how much of a proportion of our revenue budget is taken up with people services, because I don't think people realise that that is the case. When I go to parish council meetings and I explain the percentage that's spent on people services, they say, oh, we didn't realise that. So I think there's maybe more communications we can do for the public to help them to understand the situation that we're in. Which is not to make excuses, but just to help people understand that this is a situation that's happening across the country, but it is the people services that are taking up a lot of the money. I'm just wondering, are we sweating our assets enough? So things like Shaw House, I saw there was an advert on Facebook the other day for desk space, and I think there was an agency that we were using to promote it. Do we know how much money we could make out of that?
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. I won't go into bits like how much potentially we may make of that, but absolutely one of the so we've got 4 themes, including the finance improvement plan. One of those is assets, and looking at, as well as asset disposals, but actually looking at the utilisation of our assets. Exactly as you say, how can we sweat those assets further? How can we open them up for more usage? How can we generate more income? Is absolutely top of what we'll be progressing through here. I'm sure it'll be something that Scrutiny will be interested in due course. So yeah, I can't say the exact amount at Shaw House per se. We are looking to exploit though more commercial opportunities there wherever we can. Absolutely. Yeah.
Cottingham.
Yeah. So going to the survey, page 275. I don't know if the page numbers align, but asset management. The feedback is. In essence, don't sell the family silver. So they talk about assets create wealth, selling them doesn't. So there has to be a balanced approach. And a few councils have decided to sell their assets instead of EFS. They've gone. Next year, they've got EFS. So you've lost that opportunity potential in the future to generate money from your assets. So it's not to say we're not going to sell any, but there has to be a business case, a good reason why we would sell. And a good illustration is Chestnut Walk, which we talked about earlier. It's been a derelict building, but now we can invest, which then alleviates the revenue pressure. So, you know, we do have quite a number, roughly 500 properties, I think, on our asset register. And yes, we could be doing more with them. And it is an area of focus for us to increase the potential income and reduce cost across our property portfolio.
One other thing I was going to mention, are we consulting with rank and file officers about the need to save money and come up with ideas for raising money? Because experience teaches me that staff in organisations have lots of ideas about how one could save money or raise money. So are we making sure that we consult them and get as many good ideas out of them as we can?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Chair. So we have an ongoing staff suggestion scheme. So that's live for all staff to put their thoughts through, and that comes through our senior leadership team every 4 weeks. So that opportunity is there. We've had previous schemes that we've run that have, well, I say look at Dragon's Den. That's trademarked, so some alternative naming came up for it. So yeah, and absolutely, we encourage staff to come up through their service directors for plans they can see to save money, and that's really important. Exactly you say, frontline staff are those staff who can see what changes need to be made, and where we're deploying things like AI through Magic Notes, for example, for our social care staff, we can see some of those productivity improvements that happen with the greater utilisation of certain amounts of technology. I think staff will see more of some of those changes, and then we'll be able to reflect back to their teams around actually how can we use this differently? How does that shift our approach in the services that we provide and deliver? So yeah, absolutely, very much welcome staff thoughts on what we can do.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the revenue? I think we've gone through that quite thoroughly. Okay. Great. Thank you very much indeed. These papers are going to executive on Thursday evening, and that meeting will obviously be broadcast for anyone at home who's interested in listening to all this again. And it will be going to full council on the 26th of February. So thank you very much indeed to Councillor Cottingham and officers for going through all of that with us. Good. Right. Item 11, appointment of task and finish groups. This is a standing item. We haven't got any terms of references for new task and finish groups coming forward. So there's nothing that we need to approve. So we can move swiftly on to item 12. Councillor Reid, would you like to give us an update on your project management task and finish group, please?
Let me just quickly open that. Bear with me. In fact, we had one just last night, actually. So that's bear with me. Come on, is the document going to open? Here we go. Yes, so we had the last task and finish group last night, where we were looking at the report. We were asked to look at a couple of other little other projects to see if that added a flavour. But I'd say that actually the main ones that we looked at, which was Care Director 6 and iTrent, have created the main foundation of our report and recommendations. I believe it's now around about 22 recommendations that we'd like to bring forward. They are now being forwarded to the witnesses to make sure that they feel comfortable with and I must thank the officers and the staff and all the witnesses that come forward and have been very candid about areas that have worked well and areas which could have gone better, and the lessons learned that have shared with on those particular projects. We've also looked at other councils and their methods as well, Kent being in particular one, but remembering Kent is about 10 times the size of West Berkshire in population, but does show that we've got a pretty robust methodology, maybe missing some of the fancy graphics that Kent can afford, but you know, basic is good in some of those things. We're also making a commentary about where we are, where we believe the council is in its maturity in project management, as it's obviously not just a light you can turn on, but something that needs to be developed as a profession within an organisation, but by the not only by the programme management office, but the actual individuals themselves. So overall, we've now completed that. We've got a timeline. If I can just share that with you, I think that would be useful, because I do realise that I've always been a bit remiss on some of that. So we're hoping to get the feedback from the witnesses on the 20th of February, agree to any changes on the 24th of February, and then we should be ready, a deadline on the 24th to send that to corporate board, agree final changes by 6th March, and then get that back to the scrutiny committee, which is obviously the most important committee out of the lot here, on 17th March, and with the deadline on 9th March, ready for us to get a response to executive on the 21st of May.
Great, thank you very much indeed for that. Any questions, members? No, so we'll have that on our agenda for March then, hopefully. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Councillor Reid. And if you could convey our thanks to your colleagues who've worked on that as well, please, because I know how much work goes into these meetings.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 13, Executive Forward Plan. Are there any items on the Executive Forward Plan that members would like us to look at scrutiny, which we haven't got in our work programme already? No. Okay. Corporate programme. Anything in the corporate programme that members have questions or comments about? Councillor Amatharaj.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure like there is correct status being reflected. For example, I could just pick North Grove redevelopment project, which was an end date of 30th of June 2025. I know definitely that is completed a long time, so I'm not sure whether that is the latest. Even the Lido project is showing as active there, which should have been completed. Yeah, it is completed. So what is it actually telling us? Is it the only active projects here, or is it all the projects in the district?
It says current projects and live updates at the top of the sheet. I don't know if any officers are able to comment on this.
But the number of, as I said, number of projects have got end date more than a year past year.
Yeah, it's a helpful question. I will take away an action, if that's okay, just to review that you are getting the most up to date, and I presume you do not wish to see the closed projects, because I think some of those have been closed for a while. So I'm not entirely sure what the benefit is. So if I can take away an action just to clarify what has been, or the filters used to produce this list.
Sorry, Chairman, just if I may pick, like I've only noticed that there is some of the projects, there are dates which is in US format. There are multiple dates. I'm not sure what is that is reflecting. There's, for example, AFP 184, Thatcham Park early years, and the one above Calcott Schools remodeling, there is dates which looks like some of them are out of range or something. Yeah, it's a trivial thing, but just to reflect what is actually we are getting it will be good to.
And also in the second line, the future care home strategy, that hasn't actually got a current closure estimate date on it. And I think it's the only item on there that hasn't. So we probably need to put something in there about that as well. So it just needs a bit of housekeeping, I think, basically, doesn't it? Okay, any other questions, comments on that? Nope. Item 15, resources and place work programme. So, let me go back. So 17th of March, we've got waste strategy update. I've been in touch with Mr. Warren about this. So he's going to give us quite a comprehensive update, particularly around how the implementation of the 3 weekly black bins is going, how the recycling rates are going. I've been asked also, can we look at whether there's been an increase in fly tipping? So I've asked him if he can address that as well. So I think that should be quite a comprehensive report. Swift bricks, this is a motion that went to council and has been delegated to us to have a look at. That's something that would have gone to planning advisory group in the past, but obviously that doesn't exist anymore. So that's coming to us. Pedestrianisation and the project management task group that Councillor Reid referred to. So that's 17th of March, 16th of June, Public Protection Partnership. There isn't anything else on that agenda at the moment. And we've scheduled in the Thames Water Environment Agency Section 19 progress for the 15th of September. We've also got on there to be programme playing pitch strategy and business support review. Playing pitch strategy, I believe, is going to executive on the 19th of March. So I don't know if that's still the case and whether that's something we can look at scrutiny or whether we're going to run out of time. Mrs. Lawrence isn't here. So,
Yeah, so I think if it is going in March, I don't know whether you would want to add that to your 17th of March, which still technically is pre-scrutiny. So whether you want that opportunity to have the conversation, even though it would go to executive that week. I think just the other thing to add in is Mr. Morgan's request for a review around the procurement and award of contracts. That report, I think we had earmarked for the 17th of March, if you're content with that on that date. Okay. So, yeah, I think that's for scrutiny to determine whether you want those items on those dates.
Okay. Councillor Sumner.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have been contacted by residents with regards to the 20 mile an hour roads rollout, roads or zones. I was looking up and down the tables to see whether it was listed in any of the others, and I couldn't see it unless I just skipped straight past it. I think that's going to be an individual decision that deals with that once the consultation's finished. But I think it would be. I think there's been enough conversation across the area that it would be worth us looking at it.
Okay. So we need to keep an eye on when the individual decision date is and perhaps call that in then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If we can make a note of that then, just to make sure we don't lose track of that. Because that will go out to public consultation, won't it, once the council has come up with its plans for the different villages?
Yeah, I mean, some of it already has. I think Thatcham's already gone out there, hasn't it? So
okay.
There are other areas that will need to be.
Okay. Councillor Reid.
Bucklebury, Cold Ash Hermitage have already gone out. Thatcham's already gone out. So some of those are going to be turned round. And yes, yeah, just a comment. I've seen that on social media. Unfortunately, consultation is no longer for local residents, and I do wonder whether we should be looking at. Do we think it's a fair consultation for local residents, or has it become, unfortunately, the anti-war on motorists brigade have caught hold of it, and are we getting lots of opinions from the northeast of England or Scotland or people living abroad? Because it certainly doesn't feel we're just getting local residents who, quite frankly, when I've been knocking on doors, have really wanted to have a say on their own local road, and yet the voice seems to be drowned out by the National Anti-War on Motorist Brigade, sadly.
I wonder if that's something we could take up with highways and just ask them about whether we can do something in the consultations to get a clearer idea of who is local. I don't know if that's technically possible on a consultation form to capture that.
It does ask the postcode. But again, I've also seen on social media that the postcodes are often shared.
This is the challenge, isn't it, Councillor Sumner?
Which, of course, if you apply planning rules, is not an issue, because it doesn't matter how many people live in a household. If they all decide to send in a letter of either support or objection, they all count. I think the thing that we need to be mindful of is that highways are not just used by people in their locality. Highways are used by people that are visitors as well. So I do accept your point. You know, we've had consultations before where we've had addresses that have been South Africa, and we've looked at it and gone, is that really relevant? I think potentially it depends on the consultation, but if you restrict it, then you are excluding automatically anybody that is a visitor to this area. And we do know that, well, as quoted a few years ago, we were virtually 50-50 on those that lived here and worked elsewhere, or lived elsewhere and worked here. So that expansion of geography is there by default for this area, I think. All the more reason that we have a full and frank conversation about the sort of consultation results that have been analysed and go from there, I believe.
And I think we need to encourage people to participate in the public consultations as well. Because I think part of the problem is people think, oh, that's all going to go through anyway, that's fine. And then they discover that the consultation, you know, people didn't bother to participate. So, yeah, I think maybe we can do a better job of promoting those. Yeah, okay. And then business support review, that's to be programmed. Last week it was mentioned that it's still ongoing. I don't know, Mrs. Clark, are you able to comment on a likely timescale for that?
There has been phase one, and I think because it's been an ongoing process, so I think sorry, I'm just going to try and find the schedule again. It is anticipated that phase one, I think, will be completed over the summer months. So I think because it's a phased move is proposed for those kind of teams that were in scope for that phase one. So maybe autumn might be a good idea, because by then I would imagine that those teams that have been within scope for phase one, that will have been completed. We're currently out to recruit for a service lead to lead that new business support unit. So, and I think once they are in, they will start to do that kind of phased move of officers in, and that's to ensure that obviously the business as usual work continues, and that's kind of some really business critical work that will be coming in there.
Okay. Anything else on the work programme, colleagues? Oh, okay, thank you very much for that. So that brings us to the conclusion of our meeting this evening. Thank you very much indeed, everyone, for your questions and comments. Thank you to officers for coming along and supporting us this evening. And our next meeting will be in March. So thank you very much indeed.
We haven't got one next week, yet. Thank you, Richard.